Good morning, Gen Rinpoche. We're so glad that the technical difficulties were figured out. And good morning, Katrina Brooks. Thank you for your capable translations. And welcome to all our online participants. We're quickly coming to an end to this text with only 2 or 3 classes left. And if you'd like to make an offering to Geshela for the teachings, or to Katrina Brooks for the translations, or to the Abbey for hosting the teachings, you'll find information on how to do that in the chat box. So let's begin with some preliminary prayers, and the link for those is also in the chat box.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, knower of the world, supreme guide and beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies, form supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With a supreme science, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms, unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom, too well established in the trainings, the holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foil and sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Inam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
다 딕송겐나. Dia song shana diga this, then the
아니
Kudushim.
통마라는 뭐 럽차르게 하고 말아.
More lots. Dia song shilas.
야, 저기서. 야, 너티스. 돼야. 지중가배 송래로 와. 렌지니베 대외대상대. 렌지니베 대외대상대. 신도니가 텐션시주네. 인제군도 님부 레벨로 준제 매버치와 신결로스. 맞죠. 전에 렌지니베 대외대상대 당가지고 갈소다. 된저기 밀루토바데 다른 렌지 섬예버에 송겨라. 가레스나 티규디 미기와 주파 기와 주투 어딘데 주사에 대신도 공부선자 미기와 줄라 소바테조 레라부시 사투고요라 텐데 망창에서 냐와이다 던르다 텐데를 깨고마도 사담이 고마토베다 티나네 미르나 산제 땀바단제 텐데티니 밀루토바데 신도 렌직 삼데 달린 렌직 삼토버마도 망세와 남주 네 교황에 받은 들려 대대요레서 거라 렌직 예배 대대사데스 달와단 저와 추추발라 대와 튕기 상만 저와 로와 산제지된 감수처에 최소발라 소바 어디 튕기 상만 저라서 렌직 예배 대대사데 신도니에 가와서 등아주 남주 준준날에 연구해봐. 천하권리야 차바를 시다지 사루브제 나군지 대위나 나군지 대야돼 특별 남주 미개와 사배 최대에서 하죠. 근데 참살로 로를 개치치 주도 세부차로 어디에네 겨와주배 개회 삼 삼급급을 시다 좀 요기도 와서 오라. 어디도 가서 오라. 시대 참으면다 들으나서게와 로주 계시 떠바나시 산제 응외지 산제다 텐데시 최선발라서바 퇴가 텐데 그때 삼삼라 계획로를 연구해서 거라 렌징이 베테베테서데 신도니가 텐션시 주네스 인자군도 냥불렘벨로 주제매버케와 신결로서 인생 군도 냥불렘벨 로세도 아니 니다 제 가디 이나고 다다른 메세 멜로 야보시 토바데 단단단 바시셔고래서 와라 냥불렘 거래서 냥불렘한테 가래서나 아니 기부청어 제 쳔벨람라테는 냥불람 거와 야 대절람나 그거면도 당해 가 하고
So Geshela's just having a little trouble because he can't see me to know when I am done talking. So we're trying to get that resolved. So to begin with, as the master Jelama Tsongkhapa says, this life of leisure and endowment that we have found just this once, knowing its great value, please bless me to take its essence day and night to make this life meaningful. And so when we think about it, the kind of good support, the good life that we have right now with all of these leisures and endowments, when we think about it, it's obtained just once, just sort of very rarely. And that is because the causes for such a rebirth are quite rare. To abandon the 10 non-virtues and engage in the 10 virtues is something that not everyone does. It's quite easy for us to accumulate without thinking all of these non-virtuous actions, which lead to a rebirth in the lower realms. And so here, to have obtained not just a human birth, but one in which we have all of the kind of endowments, such as having met with the Buddha's teachings, this is something that is extremely rare. To have these kinds of conditions wherein the Buddha came to the world, the Buddha's teaching gave teachings, and the teachings still remain. This is something that we shouldn't take for granted, but rather should see as something that is quite rare. As Shantideva says in in his guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, likening this to like imagining there's a dark and stormy night. And it says, just as lightning illuminates the darkness of a cloudy night for an instant, in the same way, the power of the Buddha occasionally, by the power of the Buddha, occasionally people's minds are turned toward virtue. So if you have a very dark a night thick with black clouds, and there's a flash of lightning that illuminates everything for just a moment in that long course of the night. And so too, this kind of situation that we have right now is something like a brief flicker, a brief moment. And as Gelama Tsongkhapa says, reflecting on this, recognizing the rarity and preciousness of such a human rebirth that we have right now, please bless me to day and night, make it meaningful, take the essence of this life.
Oh yeah. Oh, that is it. Yeah, chichu. Oh, yeah, that is. Oh, then it tanya bull has a nimbu ramdi tasum legora. In the tongue as a church said, oh, nimbu carile gorasana. Chita, Tambudi, Joachima Lada me, Kovan Cheberse, Tanda Church Banashi, Tende, Sanje Temba. Oh, Chikaya Roach than Janico, Tanda Church by the Kona Conto Pay at Tondalia. Tenjo Milis Church to be 10 Cheberse in Yegura. Oh, Titondalia, Tenimulangura. Oh, Titondal Chima, Negab Tene, Lada me, Church to be 10 Cheberse. Tanda Church by the Kona Conto Pay at 10 Cheberse Tobe, Nimbulangures, teacher to Karche Urasana, Tiriki Kuditugura. Oh, Tinde, Shala Tsawa, Shala never share Shan Tunga Shingege, so Chevala Sowa. Lunga Yusum Yukona, Miguel Chutapa, Shala Tsawa, Miguel Chutapa. There are Shala Tsawashana, Shala Tunga Yungure, some Tseve Sambe, Gunelani, Shala Tsawa. Oh, Tene, so Chevala Sowa, Shala Pember Dube, Shabesam Yukunelani. Oh, and Shala. Shenji so Chevala Soba. Ota Mikiwa Chutba, Kiwa Chutrubate, Yabuchi Trubaina. Oh, Tintin Yenda Sameba, Joachima Milu Cheber Shenshi Topgu Sabina, Yiri Metinala, Shala Teve Mikiwa Pa, Shala Pembe, Kiwa Chula Soba Titrubi in some Yiri Metinalia, Tatsu Shakosare. I didn't do she. Oh, shall I say, Carsore, make you up, give what you took good. Oh, the Nimbutambuling at the territory as a church of Guyana, Joachima, oh, church of it, and Cavachet in the Toyota Dalia, shall I say, make you what you park, what you took good. Tin Yerin Metinal Sosu, Yuma is some shoot out on the Trukudoa. It did Tolia, Joatoma Mebana Sashabe. Miguel Mabusayo resam, that Tezo Kankali Shakba some Tezolia Shakba Chatsavala Soba. Oh, Nitinde Kawatukuda, yeah, or Tichilan.
So here, in terms of taking the essence of this life or making this meaningful, it can be done by practicing the Dharma and the various levels of practice. We have the kind of lowest level, the middling, and the supreme. When we think about, even at the lowest level, having this kind of life of leisure and opportunity, wherein we have not only a human rebirth, but have met with the Buddha's teachings, we should make sure that at the very least, we are ensuring that we gain again a good rebirth, a kind of rebirth with all of the conditions to be able to continue to improve and develop in a future life. And if we want to make sure that we have such a life in the future, we need to make an effort to accumulate the kind of causes that bring that about. So here, all of the kind of negative actions, those non-virtuous actions, are things that we should avoid. And in turn, we should strive to benefit others as much as we are able to. So recognizing that when we do sort of harmful, violent actions towards others, we are bringing about their suffering out of concern for ourselves, but also love for others. We refrain from those kinds of actions like killing and stealing and lying and so forth. And on the other hand, we try to engage in those kinds of actions that are beneficial for others, protecting life, being kind and loving to others. And this is something that we do on a continual basis, a regular sort of day-to-day kind of practice. And if we are able to engage in that sort of practice on a day-to-day basis, then we can ensure that in the future we will have the kind of life, this kind of special support wherein we are able to continue to practice the Dharma. So really, this means on a day-to-day basis, watching what is happening with our body, speech, and mind, kind of purifying or correcting that. And also recognizing that we have in previous lives accumulated many non-virtuous actions and making an effort to purify those non-virtues. And again, look at the kind of activities that we engage in on a day-to-day basis. This is how we ensure that at the very least we have a good rebirth again in the future.
Oh yeah. Oh, the Tinica soda. Oh, the Chudi Trubayina. Sendela Devarawa. Rasamba Kiba Yungure. Make it to the Pankawa shooting the Samlutana. Suzo Samba Kibu Tewa Yungura. And the Shan Nang Midabshina Tewa Yungura. Rada Nyamdo Dengue Chiso Shina Kotewa Yungura. Chichil Nova Shio Mara Chichila Pembatun, the Pembatu. But they should go Sendela Devas. The Vecure, Jidechima Pebares, the Tagisan Shikawa Sambuliares, Sungura. Oh, didn't she? Yeah, did you love Shana to do it?
So if we do this, we are happier in our own life right here and now. If we avoid harming others and we do things that are beneficial for them, we ourselves are happier and we make others around us happy. And so the kind of society or the group that we live in will be happier. And so when we refer to happiness, that's really within this life, but we're also creating the causes for benefit in terms of a good in our future life.
Oh, yeah, Tatani Nimbu, Tilea, Toz Samlia, Check Samlu Che Toru Shinera. Oh, Tati Negab, Gasonle Tara, Mondo Lamikova Tobate Agurede, Ina Lamikova, Tendo Tewashima, Negabko, Gasonle to the Tewashamatochi. Telaya Tunge Mabuyore, Roa, Give Tunge, Keve Tunge, Nave Tunge Soba, Tunge Mabuyordo. Oh, there's a gank of Samlutani. The Lada me, Givatia, Givachima, Tarbada Tamjashimbe Kova Trubechedo, Nego Ludin de la Tego with a Techedo, Givalanko with a Ludin Sambu the top Gurmado, Ludin Korango, Chanet, and to Tewachima Resam. Lada Newman be Shawado, Givalanko, Tele Tarashimachena, Netumele tend to Tawate Yogumedo Samne. Techedo. Good Panguardo, or take la carreside, and then your more Panguard. Roa. To Tagi, out and do it. Yomo Panguardo, Seba de Mana, Chakba de Mana. That Tambo Tome Mariba, Tome Mariba, Wagi, Tala Chakba Yogiva. So Seba de Mana, and a Shenda controller of Yomo Shenda Yomara. Rala Chakbe Wagi, and Shenda Ganga. Condonga Jetrado and dress with the Zukanga Yogura, or did Seba de Dosona, and it's Lele, Yuna Lele, Sutam Gigi, I never to gender song Gigi, Gendi Omara, or Timedico, Condo Danga Jeta, Trado, and dress him da Roa, in a Tado Zimbabwe, some social shaboche, Geshe Shanda, Geshe Judah, Tinder Samantone, oh, Tinder him, no more like 2010. Oh, Naje Condo Trado la Soba, Telecon to ten. Seba de Pa, Paya Tabshin, and the Tarwa Togudwa. Rala Rawameba, Pumbudo Leche could be Kyoatele Tarwa Yogore. Teacher doing Chonata, I remember Congura, time ever, Sapsanga Rawa, Tender Babata. Teo get Chagwa, Condo Naje Trato and dress similar soba. Oh, there's a nearing medicine alpha. Nyorutane, Nyorutane, this Sebache could do something. The Tarvedeva, Tom de Yulote, Tumele Tendo Tarwa. Rala Rawameba, Pumbu Doleche, Guvatele Tendo Tawa, Chichago, some. But they do any Yamol Nebutension, Yamo, Yerin Betanalepa, Nyorutane, Tabshicha Gudwa. Teach an any Nimbu, drink the Rawa Nele Tarbada, Tabjek Bashe. Tarbade Tobechido Begora, Nelexe, Nelexu Tagin, Tendolada me Koba Tobate, Thank you, and Juro Mebe Teoke Marwa. Tatanda Tarbatosuna Neba Legbara, Joa Meba. Then the Juro Meba Roa. Oh, this was a Nelik, Tarwa Segura. Ya, Tichilam.
So, in terms of taking the essence of this life that we have right now, there's the lowest level, and then beyond that, a kind of higher level, one begins to contemplate that even if you are born as a human or a god, you're not freed from all of the various kinds of sufferings that occur for samsaric beings. So you're still subject to birth, aging, sickness, and death, and all kinds of other types of sufferings, even as a human or a god. And so here, this level of contemplation seeks for liberation, for getting free from all of the various afflictions and really that uncontrollable rebirth due to karma and the afflictions. So here, although even if one gains a good rebirth as a human or a god, that's not going to bring about definite freedom from suffering. So a being at this level recognizes that we need to abandon all of our afflictions. When you have first this initial ignorance that then gives rise to kind of attachment to one's own side and so forth. And in particular, one recognizes the fault of craving, that kind of craving that fosters, that nurtures karmas that lead to renewed rebirth. And so if you were able to avert that, to get rid of both of the fundamental, that initial ignorance that grasps at an I and holds to some kind of autonomously, independently existent I, as well as if you get rid of the kind of craving that acts as a condition for nurturing karma, if you don't have that condition to nurture karma in the future, then you won't take further rebirth. So seeing the fault of the various afflictions, our jealousy and our anger and our attachment and so forth, particularly seeing how when as long as we have afflictions, that leads to taking rebirth uncontrollably under the control of our karma and afflictions, one at this level sees that really in order to gain definite freedom from that cycle of rebirth, one needs to eliminate the afflictions completely. So looking at the process by which that initial ignorance, which grasps at an I, and then how out of attachment to one's own side and aversion for the other, one then continues this cycle of rebirth. And so at this point, a being of sort of middling capacity recognizes I need to have this kind of definite freedom, freedom from that cycle of taking rebirth under the control of karma and the afflictions. And due to seeing the faults of the afflictions, they recognize that we want to gain definite goodness, a kind of liberation, even though a good rebirth as a human or a god is better than the lower realms. It's not definite goodness in the sense that it's kind of like a stepping stone that can lead to that lasting happiness of liberation. So at this point, one goes from striving for a kind of temporary reprieve from the sufferings of samsara to wishing to get out of those entirely, wishing to gain the definite goodness of liberation.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the Dukas, Tatanda, Niri Mizina Samlutani, Nga Samsange, Nga Soputa Madre, Soada Madre, Dushita Madre, Tanda Luda Semda, Draw me gagging Arachi, Nashagdoagazo, Lingling Sigdoa, Lingbuchi, calling Lindrep, she lost she ever shagdoa. Oh, Tindreti, Leatan Sigudanga to Mabusha Samba. Oh, Tindre Samlu to Teleten and the Condrudan, Jetan Tradoda, Milatonju Cheta, Yamo Mabuchi Granimeko. Oh, Tezukanga Kembachune. Oh, Tang is Samlu Tiku Doyadi, Militrado Chigdoa, Dressim Chigdoa. Naje Chigdoa, Tonju Chigdoa, some Muziche, Niri Metinalo, Tangaya, Samlutin Recruiting Dimasun Yamore, Sa, Nur Tayachana, and Noko, Joan Dugua. Oh, the Rechanadi, so sendele, so kibo. Rangin Nami in a round the Yamdo Legaching and Samota Timbo. You know, I thought Madrichun that Sabaco, oh, Tasabacom with Chado Chigio Mare, something Yamore, Qua Koji Judy some. Tende Samlutana, Sendele Radavare. Make your chimata tendo, Tarvecova to be children to order. 제가 기분 되게 쳐다 지나고 내가 대화스도 챈들을 라신 상마 대회 주도 알아. 다 치마 겨와 치마 들려네 라라 펴봐. 남이진 되고 뭐마데 겨와 치마데 용거 알아. 어디실람나. 야.
So, here in our day-to-day lives, if we can recognize, we have this sense of an I, this I that is somehow like independent, apart from our body, apart from our mind and our feelings and so forth. We have this sense of an I that's like concrete and real, somehow separate and apart from the aggregates. And as long as we have that kind of sense of an I, that grasping at an I, then we give rise to all kinds of various afflictions of jealousy and competitiveness and pride and contempt and so forth. And so a being of this kind of, a practitioner of this level recognizes that these afflictions, recognizing them as afflictions and how they create bad results, they try on a day-to-day basis to reduce those afflictions. They see that it all stems from this misperception of an I, and thereby are working in their day-to-day life to get rid of these various afflictions. So when they say have a disagreement with others, they're more able to practice patience. Or when you see or encounter various difficulties because of seeing the faults of engaging in the afflictions, this kind of practitioner avoids those afflictions, reduces them on a day-to-day basis, which creates greater happiness in the here and now, in our day-to-day life. It makes both ourselves and others happier. And although the kind of happiness of this life is just part of the result, the real ripening result comes in terms of the future lives that we, in terms of the future and gaining liberation.
Oh yeah, what you do that, ne? Nimbo rabdi gibu chembe samle to korgeora. Oh, then the tarachibu tarwato koyatungele tel. Tesam samlutana mandibore samgeora. Rangitsende pamala soba, Nyenitula soba, Nita Kimbena Namila soba, Puputula soba, Sazala soba. Ya soso chendela kala cheba songuyana. Oh, Tezu Sama, Lia Samluche Matane Sosuchibu, Tabrato Samlutana Dimaresam. Tezu Sama Rana Shikawa Toma Bavana Kuako, Tunganya, de Tanda Mamba Duste when a pechoresam. The Konzoya Dumeta Drag Tapsi. Chetungbezi Chegure, some rank Chendi Paman Dela Soba, Tezu Samal Samlatara. Oh, Tezukanga, Tini Yawar Port, Samluche Matane, Sosuchibu. Tatelia Samlatan, Jawatoma Mabanara, Koyatungajan, Tanda Mahaba Nine, but this Samlanali Yokorangene. Tungesidus Taras said the Chibu Tunge Marwa. Oh, Tezu Samlakona Ran, she conjoined Tungetin de Yonder, Mahaba to the Yongere Samne. Sende Pamala Soba Soso Kala Cheba Yunaya, or Tezula Samutagiora. Pada Madam, Pungazo Parshiba Marshiba, Tatas Garsuda, Jude Magato, the Tashan Yamji, Chuneto Samtangiordo, or Tinesh Samluta. Dear Samlutan, oh, that sent the Pamada Yendeto to Cutting Chambore. Remember a cutting chamber Mawina. It didn't shake Yawama, Chira Midashi Lion. Tinga Machaka, the mill line, Tandura line, Padama, Sendina Shimabu Yungura. Then the Simjan de Jawala Toma made Simjan de Pacha, Macha, Tension Butcher, and the Tension Butcher, Madasa. Then they call touch at your matter. A day in the Sosutili and Gange. Chiso Karina middle some of the all coachana, Joangamanga, Pama Transit and the Cura, Coat in the Curia. Tanda Kawaka around and draw you and to the Tanda tree, they left the Gira. You cigra. Oh, today, Karina, Jursigre, some day. And it's how much Kijipe and all my chamber mother. So, Joangama Trangere, Kanga, Trangi, and Joangama mirrors, Joala, and Tanda, Padamada, Kabuni to Karis, Ranga Chidova. No, Condus, get a Sigra. Or Tende Samlutane. Rather than doing this and get to said daily part of Mother Ned and you struggle. Tende Majuna, Joangama, Tende Jurte or Resam. Kijipen and Oma Shimba Mato. Somewhat in the jury or Resam. ane dezu kanga chikpa resha yawar doya medu simchen tamche da dewa da chaydu da tungwe da chaya kukudu di tinte che tungwe rangi ngone sige wara rangi ngone simchen le chokri meba che simchen yinpa zamli pen to sige wara mada simchen tamche tungwe le chaya dewa le guyo tuwe chida yaw mara changma ngonje sanje chang meba chonsara tanda simchen mabu deya wara simchen tamche sayade rangi ngone simchen changma ge tōne che tōngi tēndē che chūku tō samgē wārā. Samjē wā tēndē samdē. Samjē tamjē kē tōndō sē rāna yāyā lē yōngē tō kāngā. Tē kē shambu dōwā ngā zō. Chītāngā rē samlu tāngā, rē samlu mā tāngā pēngi mē sōngu dōwā. Samjē tamjē sē shendā chī lī yōbē sō rē samlu tāndē. Samjē tamjē sē rāngā nye kōr tā yōngē tē zō kāngā ngē lē samlu tāngā dōwā. simche re la dige ma she jere tin cha kar kyo nga ma ka pen do pe che jere sam tinde samlu ta re le samlu ta ranyam do yo ge to ne eni chi ta samlu ta o tinde che gur so do o ti do kar so re ra da nyam do yo de ge to zu ka ga ka ti che bo yin ba da ke zu chang me to tu ba chi ku do ti to do ra ta da ra le ne ba yo ma re ra kyo ku se yin de kun de ji sa je ji ko ba tu ba cha gi sam Niri mbezna kyo nashi na se, tene yode nashi na trumne, pe kaze ngorna, kyo kuse yode kunde ji kansa shi, gyura chagi yin samsa chaya kudwa, tiche ne kibu chimbu semje kudwa, ya tiche lana, ti nyingbu ke cheshu dira, ta ti chungla ta tsendela, randa she, tewa da kaze she mungurwa, rale she ke chewa tsikru gyora, 어제니 겨와 땐도 대와 탐제 김에 고바토베 귤로 요라 야 되지라나
So then the sort of highest way to make this life meaningful that we have right now is by thinking, well, if I were to seek just my own liberation and disregard all of these beings around me who have shown me great kindness, that's really not suitable. But rather, all of these beings that, like those that I cherish and value in this life, we should recognize that they too, since beginningless time, have been taking rebirth uncontrollably. They suffer due to the kind of same conditions that we do. So we think I need to find a way to free them all as well, not just sort of disregarding them or forgetting about them. And here again, when we think about the suffering of others, we shouldn't think of just the sort of situations that look like suffering, but here we are talking really about taking rebirth again and again, uncontrollably due to the force of karma and the afflictions. And so whoever it is that we cherish and value in this life, our mother, our father, our friends, our family, our children, whoever it might be, when we talk about them and the kindness that they have shown us, we should recognize that it's not just those beings who in this life have shown us great kindness, but really we have all taken rebirth beginninglessly without any kind of beginning. And therefore, in these countless rebirths, we can't really point to any single being who hasn't acted in that capacity. Although we may not remember it, the fact is that those who are around us, even the one that we are maybe getting angry at right now, was one being who cherished us, who showed us great kindness in the past. So although we might not recognize it, all sentient beings have acted in this capacity. And so when we say all sentient beings, we should include all of them, recognizing that again, countless Buddhas have come into the world and have tried to help lead beings out of this state, but yet there are still infinite sentient beings who still remain. And the ones who are left here, we should recognize have acted towards us with great kindness. When we begin to try to contemplate working for the benefit of all sentient beings, though, we shouldn't have this sort of category that seems like something other, all sentient beings that's over here, while we disregard those who are right around us. But rather, this kind of mental training begins with those who are right around you. We have to think about the person who is next to us, to our right, to our left, and we we begin by thinking in that way, and then we come to encompass all sentient beings. It's not like there's some other category of this thing called all sentient beings, but really it begins by training our mind in relation to those that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. And when we have that kind of recognition that then begins to encompass all sentient beings and wishing to free them from their kind of suffering situation, we recognize that at the current time, we don't have the ability to be able to benefit these sentient beings, to get them out of samsara, because we ourselves are still subject to that. And so there's the wish to become a fully enlightened Buddha, one who has removed all faults and developed all good qualities. And so striving toward that state, trying on a daily basis to remove whatever sort of faulty minds we have and develop all good qualities, we give rise to this kind of attitude. May I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. And so really, this is the very best way that we can take the essence of this life, that we can make it meaningful, come to a point in which we learn to cherish others more than we cherish ourselves.
Oh yeah. Oh, this is that and that. Karsoda. Young Arazu Tindre Samgutova. Chure Sheva in a young Yachi Sheson. Jinga Shingi Samsa. Young Jai Labutu Shingi Sam. Tindre Sam Deodua. The Shingi Sam the tea. Shena Young Yana Yang to Turgora. Migi Sheva the Yana Yang to Tur. Rawa Sosa Samlu Yana Yang to Tangura. Sheba Janja to the Marwa. Sheba te yang Geshe yang Ye yang Samlutan Chena, and a con never church Duyara. Church said the co Mazu Pechan and Geshe Yeshe. Kilia Shachitresona, Kilia Shachitena. Kosha de co Ronyon Marwa. Have such a Chojing Jajama Mixagre. Tinang Yakari mixed the Sultan and Kishido the Sigra. Or dinner Shichu Amarsodua. Chenya, Ronyon, Sosa Samlutan, Sudachi, Tichagora, or T in the Karsoda. Tinda Yana Yandu Samlutan Atelia, never year some Tig Pacha Shire some Yajan Drugi some Gora, Mato Namsa, Chutura, Tenchi Shibuchi, Mendraji Chaya, Samlutan Yomare. Church had to go sim do yet to Darwa, simly Caban do the way, and a Lungalia, Kunjuli Caban do the way. Mimata Medratos Caban do a Taura. Titandali Yana Yang to Samlutayara. Yana Yang to Samlutan de Conde Conde Pedro, Nuba Cheru Shebet and the Pasha Shaviora. The Yajan do yore. Simply Yandedo Kanga. Kaja Samna ko Yana Yang to Kumdrich and any Yajan do Mato Timato Tapshi Shandaka Yomarwa. Namditos na Yunguba. Simply Yandedo. Chamba Yenadra, Ninji Yenadra, Seva Yenadra, Tenet, Tamito Bolo Yenadra, Kare Yenaya. Yana Yandu Samlutan, Takwate Samlutan, Ya never church Redera. This and the Sechen to Negma Richera. Tayajan Dre Mevatin Dekemara, and the Samlana Namsa hope to imagine that Kebachen Roma do Samsa Tengio, Keban Doyora, Pasha Tem Saru Sabro, Roa. She took your she church some with the Pasha Shavora or tea in the Karsoda. Can you return on my long time about it? The same day and then to return combat terra race, Yaja Conde the dread. Says Yoma race, Yaja Madro, Tegamaris, Kaze Combe and Tisa Pasha tour, sing it in the church do Yora. Or this was the combat Yana and the combat Comdice terra Yaja dread to Dalia. The Katse Kumdiche Batesam Yatene Yajan do some or today Yavucho Tinde Samluta Pacha Shato Sosa she Avutso Samsa or Tinde Samluta Mato Kati that the Lam Mantra which is ordered. Kasu Taba Janjan Basha Sogudwa Poram Shinshu Nimbuchi Amese. Porambishing to the Chilo Papa de Sarasa Maris, Teva de Chilo Papa National. Nalo Rongamo de Yongo Resogua, or tea in the or pay away a Keva Sambu to reach and you simply Samlataya Choso, Tombanyola Samlataya Choso, pay Pasha Lapchum Bushaso Samsa, Kawa come the Range Kevala Chesu Ranche, Tindesi Samlatangura, or any year into Neta, Tiri ma namsa ji yundara shibji kegu yu samsa chayda, indi ta kye medusa, indi yushaya nyaga yuwarwa. Ti indi ta tunda keching bawa chasa. Simche tamche ke tun trup tungen ke, kyun kunsa yundan kunden ji sanje ji koban chi tobar cha, te che do chu nyene, nyeri metse navle ranga yanda kumri che ne, tar sanje ji koban tobar cha, te che do tambe chu nyengi yin sam, Kulu say tamne sambar shoes. Tandris.
So here, when we hear the Dharma, when we listen to the Dharma, sometimes we can think, oh yeah, I know this, like I've heard this before, I know this. But really, when it comes to hearing the Dharma, it's not as though we're hearing it just to sort of know it, but really to integrate it into our mind. We hear something again and again and contemplate it again and again because that is beneficial for our minds to be able to actually accustomate to that or habituate to that. So here there's a saying that like we shouldn't approach hearing the Dharma the way a dog approaches a piece of meat. Like when a dog is given a piece of meat, if they don't usually get that, especially, they're going to just sort of like, chow down on that really quick. They don't even think about it. They're hardly even chewing or tasting it. But the way that we should listen to the Dharma is one in which we're really like chewing it over in our mind, like relishing that taste, cherishing the taste of it. And we shouldn't expect like instantaneous dramatic results, but rather should rejoice in just putting down some imprints in our mind. If there is some kind of a difference over time in our mind through the practice of the Dharma or through thinking about having learned and contemplated the Dharma, that's really what we are looking for, a difference in terms of our way of thinking and comporting ourselves. It's not as though we should expect to have like miraculous powers or some sort of clairvoyance after hearing, but rather we should really value the putting down of imprints in our mind. As Dharmakirti says in the Pramanavartika, the qualities, to develop qualities of mind requires mental engagement. Whether we are talking about compassion or patience or understanding selflessness, we have to repeatedly engage the mind in those various topics in order for that to get stronger and stronger. But the qualities of mind are such that there is no limit to them. I won't quote the exact verse, but it is the case that when we engage the mind, familiarize it with something again and again, there's actually no limit to the development of those mental qualities. So although it isn't something where we can expect an instantaneous dramatic change, the kind of foundation that we are laying through these imprints is something that is really going to lead to change. Those imprints get stronger and stronger, however much more we engage in them. And so recognizing that gaining this kind of familiarity is something quite precious and good, we should really be happy. We should think like, I'm so fortunate to be listening to these teachings, to have this kind of opportunity. And again, strive to really take the essence of the teachings in the sense of like, in the same way that a sugar cane, the kind of outside skin doesn't have the real taste of it, we shouldn't be satisfied with that. We should really go for the nectar of that. So here, sort of rejoicing, having a happy kind of mind, thinking that I'm putting down these imprints of the Dharma in my mind, and may they remain for a long time. May this be something that continues to develop and grow within me. If we don't have this kind of approach to the Dharma and learning about the Dharma, if we expect some kind of instant dramatic change, then there's the danger of us thinking like, oh, well, I tried this and it didn't work, and we kind of throw it away. And so here, as we approach this listening to the Dharma, we should think that, again, with a kind of happy attitude at the opportunity to get to put down these imprints in our mind, we should think, I'm listening to this Dharma for the sake of being able to become one who is able to benefit all sentient beings, a completely enlightened Buddha who has developed all good qualities and eliminated all faults. And for the sake of being able to gain such a state, I'm going to familiarize my mind again and again with these precious teachings.
Oh yeah. What this one?
Tis-
Tonga zudi ma lo shan sam de de ba. Oh yeah. Tumbe chö song ba nam ne se ta de ma lo shan de da. Tumbe sanje chum de de chö song ba nam ne se wa ra. Tujanam Negab Ngondo, Ngondo Lami Koba Tobato, Tatanga to share Sarimba, Negab Neson with Joa Malasha, Lami Koba Tobata. Neba Legba, Tarvata, Takisheba, Nelek said, Neba Lebas in Juromeba, Rava, Chita Dumele Tarsonane, Juameba, Tendo, Tempote del Sigora. The Koya de Wonders in Tembuke Omarva, Conjutura. Nele Tarvata Tamje Kimbe, Nele Tarvata Tamje Kimba, Bashigi Cheto Yela, Titan da Ocho Songotoa, Titanga Lapsaimba, Modulami Koba Tobala Karko, Nele Tarva Tobal Kar, Tamje Kimbe Koba Tobal Karak Trukoto, Sosan Metsena, Sam Karatan Goto, Titan de Lapsaimba Otire. Tia Teji Deberjo Ayala, Chuniji, Kone Koran Jubata, Tinin Dogbe Chu Sambale, Tuber Chagu Shese. So Koalia, Kyotobala, Kyotola, Tende Yala, Chuni Kone Samlutan Gudwa. Oh, Tende Yala, Chuni Kone Koya Kandis Kore Sam, Nga Samsa Samluti, and then I Samsa Chakbaki, and it didn't dream my decision to control. Tiwange any lunga yusum bichawa lanju kwa kiwa penjo lesa yora. Ne mege lesa dunga son leke chakbe wange kiwe le de sasuna chakbe wange sonza ene lada mele ke le le tuwa. Oh tiende yala chunyi kwaran jukba da kwa korna de tome mariba nibandu baanje korna shera. Tan do su de do na de do se Dogbe Rebasiba, Titalian Rosaso, Tan do it. Koran Jugba, the thing in Dogbe Su Sambe, Truber Chaquish, so Koya Tungelia, Tambuko, Jona de Bishuk Chambers Korva, Ginju Saura, the Yana Yando said that she would make Jonga Manawa and Rikitin and Millikan, Katina, Toma Mevan and Yanda, but this Samlatana, and the Sambachoko at the Shora. The Mahobola to stay there, there's a Kawakara Kito and the Kai Samsarishra. And that said the Kajang to me that it then drove Shevio Mara, Minjunti Samloko. Thinking dog with Sambale, Truber Chakushes. Te Chune Tomar, Modo Drube Tapsu, Kidigi, Lede Titu Joala Mombe, Maribe Wange, Nyandukawa Penjiki, Mikiwe Lesande. Nyawa yeda tendo koar kurtu sambate sambana tele tende jola se teda treve ene kare tapsu kidigi le debu tidu joa yishebe jidebe yanda be tawada dembar shete ese o tade karsora chita kibu chomu ina ko Tome Mariba Kunelana de Yongora. In a Kibichunga Sutongbanya, Tome Mariba, Tombany, Tanzi de Geshe Gomara. Le Jumdela Mona, Le Kewachena, Debutewa Yoata, Mikewachena, Debutunga Yoata La Mone. Ene Mikewachuchena, Nason La Keata, Tepa Kewachutuna, Sada Mille, Keg, Landeg, Namshala, Mamumbachen, Esse. Mishiba Mombasa de Landela Mone. Kewatumna Yano Yabu Yunga to Mikewa Sana to Buyumba Hamagone, any less of your destined share. Tome Mari was a Tamotike Shagumara, Kimchungu de China. Oh, to the tenant. This way, what about the Chilamna? Yeah, do you get it?
No. So then picking up in the text, and we are on page 96 of the English, beginning with any teaching of the Buddha is only for the sake of his followers temporarily obtaining higher rebirth. Higher rebirth, meaning sort of like happiness, and ultimately the high state of a human or a god, and ultimately obtaining the definite goodness of liberation and omniscience. So here, again, as we've been speaking of, any teaching of the Buddha is really for the happiness and benefit of beings, whether it is for sort of temporarily obtaining a higher rebirth or ultimately obtaining the definite goodness of liberation and omniscience. And so the way in which one contemplates this, or furthermore, you must accomplish these by contemplating the way we enter cyclic existence and the way we end that process in terms of the 12 factors of dependent arising. So here, when it comes to the being of initial scope, a being of initial scope, although they aren't looking as closely at the kind of initial ignorance and that process of the 12 links, they understand the way that our karma, our non-virtuous and virtuous karma, lead to various rebirths. Now, here, someone who is striving for liberation is looking for that kind of state which is unchanging. A temporary good rebirth is not going to lead to a stable, lasting happiness. Anything in samsara is not stable, is not in the nature of happiness. But in order to and then strive for that state of definite goodness, one needs to contemplate the kind of process, again, beginning with this initial ignorance, this thought of I and then mine. And when we have this kind of attachment to our own side, aversion for the other, when there's something that's slightly not right, we engage in various karmas, in various actions that in turn lead to further rebirth within samsara. So understanding the kind of forward order, how these links lead to the next, and how we reverse that, how we get out of that, is the way in which a being really is able to generate a real sense of renunciation. By contemplating the defects of samsara, there's a sense of sort of revulsion with that, but then knowing the way to get out comes from thinking about these various, the process of the 12 links of dependent arising. So the method to do this is as follows. In the beginning, as the means of attaining higher rebirth, you contemplate how happiness and suffering are effects that arise from virtuous and non-virtuous karmic actions, and how, through the influence of ignorance, you accumulate non-virtuous karmic actions and then pass through cyclic existence as hell beings, hungry ghosts, and animals. Contemplating this, you desire freedom from this process. To attain this freedom, you acquire a correct worldly view, which is an understanding with conviction that happiness and suffering arise from virtuous and non-virtuous karmic actions, respectively. So even for a being of the initial scope of motivation, one needs to think about this kind of correct worldly view in the sense of virtues and non-virtues being the cause of happiness and suffering, respectively. And so out of ignorance, then, creating karmic actions, the whole process of the 12 links is not extensively contemplated so much as understanding in this correct worldly view of the connection between karmic actions and their results.
Oh yeah, that is it. Oh yeah, this was land. Deda, Jay Tapsu, Kibu Chungu Kapsu, Kare, oh, Mikiwa Chudipa, Kiwa Chutu, Tapdel Karasam Tangursana, Jigdebe Yanda Betawa Segdo, Tomba Nida Tindeke Samtang Marwa, Jigdebe Yanda Betawas, Ganzo, Mikiwa Chunalia, Nursum Lotas Shiva, Titele Kiwa Chutu, Tindo Chodilla, Yanda Betawas, Jigdebe Yanda Betawa Segdo. Ti tongpa nyeda tinte keshke maare. Te kaare sana, so chubala soba mikiwa chu le sana, kiwa ngamba chendele rang miki, shen miki, ane rawa shen la naba ke, kiwa chimba tela, nyawa yeda tondol soba tunge mambu yungu re se te rawa. O, tene mikiwa ka sora, yangda be tawa de kaare sana, tu kiwa sakbala tene, drebu mambu bala tewa lada mi kumbala soba togu re se. Kiwa chuti tumna. Mikiwa chuti sabayi na ngesong le kikide se. O tili yichi yunga tili yangda be tawasi do, jikde be yangda be tawasi. O tili yichi yunga ane ko o ta mikiwa chuti pa namato ngesong le kikiyo asa. Kiwa te chuti ti yinsam. Kiwa chuti tu, mikiwa chuti pa na lada mi koba yabo tupkiyo asam. Sendele rangda shen kiba yin, tewe kyu yin, kibe kyu yin. Maungba la ya ti yabo yosam. O tindeti yonen tiyo ramato, tongba nyeda tindeki chike she kumara. Ya tichi lana, dito jide kasa. O lende le mombe marikpa la sokban dobe, rinpa nam Kandusa. What a dear. Kitty Gilel and Debu Titu Jua Yishibe, Jitembe Yanta Betawat and Tempershet, Landela Mombe, Mariba, Gagba, Las of one dog Rimba, Roa. And then Rimbanam Sambale, Shala Cheve, Tikba Mikiwa Chupon, Shambenji Kewa Chushindu, Loba, Lobe, Modu Lame Koba, Tobar Shebata. Ya na kare ne ya nge so ge kyawa cham ko sera ya nge so ge kyawa cham mayin bar tendo lami kyawa da chebe ko le yon so trewe o diba to chi lamna tendo do ko le yon so trewe tarba tobe tapsu kunjun tembe kyu Juyi tende tuda, tunge tembe, debut tende tugi kone, doa ritu do kurzu, teta, tende doa. Tende samlutane, teacherwa. And the Juyi tende tuda, debut tende tu said, kasi yala chuni said, Tome Maripashe, Niban Duji, Sumba Namshi, Sumchoswa, ne Keba Seba, Kuba Lemba. Chuba Siba true tele cute in the two cigar. Timainga to the debut in the shooter. Oh, teach it up there.
So here, when it comes to having the correct kind of worldly view, again, for someone who is of the initial scope, they abandon the 10 non-virtues and engage in the 10 virtues based upon having a kind of correct worldly view. So when we think about the 3 non-virtues of mind, covetousness, malice, and wrong view, wrong view includes not just the kind of an initial ignorance grasping at a truly existent self, but also the kind of ignorance of causality, of karmic cause and effect. And so here, for a being of small scope, they initially need to gain a kind of conviction that non-virtue will lead to suffering and virtue leads to happiness. And so when you have that kind of conviction in the relationship between virtue and happiness and non-virtue and suffering, then you will make the effort to kind of create those particular causes. So here, as it continuing in the text, to attain this freedom, you acquire a correct worldly view, which is understanding with conviction that happiness and suffering arise from virtuous and non-virtuous karmic actions, respectively. You then contemplate the stages of cessation, the cessation of the ignorance that is confused about cause and effect and so forth. And then due to that, you thereby abstain from the 10 non-virtuous karmic actions, harming others, and learn properly the 10 virtuous karmic actions through which you help others. In this manner, you attain higher rebirth, the state of a human or a god. And so having that kind of conviction with a correct worldly view, one then engages in virtue and abstains from non-virtue. Furthermore, to obtain nirvana, the complete liberation from cyclic existence, freedom not only from rebirth in the miserable realms, but also from rebirth in the happy realms of humans and gods, you contemplate how you cycle through rebirths as the 6 types of living beings by means of the 6 causal factors of dependent arising that are the true origins of suffering, and the 6 effect factors of dependent arising that are true sufferings. So here, then, at the sort of middling scope, one is contemplating the full causality of the 12 links of dependent origination. As we have explained earlier in the context of describing these, there are the 6 causal factors, which are that initial ignorance, the kind of formative actions, consciousness, the first 3 links, as well as then that craving, grasping, and becoming, the 8th, 9th, and 10th links. And all of the rest then fall into that of being the 6 effect factors of dependent arising, which are the true sufferings. Yeah, Diksha.
Oh, yeah, they do, sir. Oh, that on the Karisha Sosana, Kibuchungina, near Songi Tungele Tarde, Dendro Lada Mekoba, Dele Tom de Mikachupa, Kewachu Tubudoa. 다 기본 된다 되서이나 아니 교회 텐데 투단 데뷔 텐데 투 삼베코네 아니 로아리 투가를 하다 멜케나야 동해지 라시체 바하고네 텔레타르네 타르와 ton도니와 타르베 람투고요 레서시도서 동해 테니카르스라 데뷔텐데 투게 코네 코아 도아 리투도 쿠르츠 도아 리투도 쿠르츠 삼바 쿠르츠 삼바다 텔렌 도베 추다 도베 탑 텔렌 도베 추 삼데 람덴다 고데니데바 도바데 고데체 도베 탑데 람데체 템바시 코네 코알레 트타다 동해 템바도 군주 템바니지 코네 코아 코다 고덴다 람덴 콤발레테네 고덴 톰네 코알레 트다 어디셰가 레체라 기분적이 가서 고람니지 추삼데 박베 람야라 게라 소발라 로발레 네바 토바르체바에 넣어서 팔람야라 게라 소바 테줄라 로코야 데서야 야 디바도 치교나
So here again, for the being of initial motivation or small scope, in order, what they're trying to cease or avoid is a rebirth in the lower realms. And so in order to do that, they then engage in virtuous actions, avoiding non-virtues to be able to avoid such a rebirth. Whereas for the being of middling scope, they are trying to get out of samsara altogether. And so they are contemplating, as it explains here, how one cycles through rebirth by means of the 6 causal factors of dependent arising that are the true origins of suffering, and the 6 effect factors of dependent arising that are true sufferings. So reflecting on the methods for cultivating the true cessations that end the process and the path that is the means of ending that process, you obtain the definite goodness of liberation by training in the eightfold noble path, and so forth. So here, by understanding in particular, the 4 noble truths in terms of these 12 links of dependent origination, a being of middling scope understands how it is that these true origins of suffering then lead to the effects of true sufferings, and likewise how it is that through cultivating the path by training in the eightfold noble path and so forth, they can attain the kind of cessation that is the definite goodness of liberation.
Oh yeah, that is one. 다테나 코아르 민중게 삼바 케웨 탑 코알라 네반주에 민중고 삼바 케웨 탑 담바 약슈데스거라 초드기보다 테 셴니바 메바 셴다요 마레세 테 가레레스네 꾸네 녀몬베 텐데 로중후 다 르와 루도 콤바티니 옐라세 텐데 테네 민중고 삼바케 코알레 탄데 케웨 탑 가레스네 근데 너무 저게 텐데 로또다 로존이 콤바티레셔라 로또 콤세데 달도 사서 로또 콤세데 가시 슈니바 가시 치르베 텐데 삼르타네 로케 차네 네 케바 나와다 치와다 치 동해다 이메데와다 툭발라서 봐 동해대서 강가 컨디션에서 삼르타라 거에 동해 삼아 녀에다 던도에다 더 밀르비치게나 미 동해 개네니치 양해시 민가 도양우고야다 기제 동해 마부용하여라 대서 강가 삼르타네 대 동해 담바 삼르타고라 대 삼르타네 대 가리자니 용거래세 루토데 삼르타고라 그네 녀몬베 텐데 루토데 삼르타고라 담보 대서 동해 대 삼마데 가리자용어라 민드비시게네 미 동해 삼마 냐와예다 던도 동해 삼마 가리자기와라 다 민데서 삼르타나 미 깨발랑바데게 세ව레 삼게와라 룩도 스티라 동해대 삼르타 로 제가 동해 가게 삼다 티가가 가릴 땐 초레 동해 땐 삼다 딜코 밀레 깨발랑바데 초레 사라 로 주지바 깨발랑야데 가리젠 초레 로 에데 주바스베 레레데 밀레 깨발렌제게 레 누바 투젠 델레테네 초레 사 주바스베레 미겨렌체게 네바 투자에 근데 저래 딜이야 에네 네마사세베 니바 두치게 레들이야 렘바데게 로 세바 슉처르심베 렘바데 텔레소에탐 네바 투자에 전에 저래 삼겨라 렘바데 가르레테네 저래서나 에티 고바 렘바데 케바 세발레테네 동해대 대화를 세바 세 텔레텐 텐드바 슈크셔신 총가레스 텐데 삼르타네 텐데 치마치마다 가마 텔레텐 줄 다 개바 세바세로 timba tsora ra ene tukpa shivamisa nga bachi tukpa rekpa ra tukpa rekpa wangbo da teso tsone yuda rekpa te yuda chepa tela rekpa sikwa ra miwa lu shi luwa wangbo da sheba da yudu chepa le tene chepa tela rekpa sikwa ra shivamisa nga bachi tukpa rekpa ra ene nga bachi rekpa te kara mega kechi naga kechi teso le tene chunga resi 와 시범에서 나가 계시라 나가 계시를 가릴 때는 좋아래 뒤따마디 시범 명수 명다 수그 때인데 밤에 구다한테 버틀지 와 시범 명수 때 가르 좋아서 때 somba 남시 때도 레지 파샤냐한테 티티를 참자서 티 좋아래 때 남시 레 네버 투제냐게 남시도 근데 이번 도시 레사는 틸 좋아래 ते तोमे मारे बोल छोरे ते लोग दो समलता है तेरे दो ते समलता दे तुम्हें तंबा समलता के वाता तुम्हें तो जो कंडीशन रे सो ते कंडीशन दो समझे तुम्हें निजो के संबके तुम्हें दे समलता ते छोशा समझे वाला तो लोजो समलता दे ने तोमे मारे बोल को ने लाने निबंध जो संबंधम शिशवा तंडे से ने अने खोर दो समझे कुंजो ते बद समलता के वाला 토메 마르바 니반 두지 숨반남시 군주라 텔레테네 껴와슬라 시바 메수치 되쇼라 야 제바세바 쿠발레바 추바세바테 큐르바 텔레테네 야 껴와라 시셰그도 어디 군주 때부터 시셰그 되셔라 딘디도사 코아르니 조게 삼바치베 탑셴이바 메바네 꾸네 녀몬베 텐데 로순 조와다 로렌 독바 티니 옐라세 타르바 냥엘레 데발라 쮸메게 다 타르바 토베토라 남자 속에 때문에 고텐다 람데니 시고라 타르바 냥엘레 데발라 쮸메게 되냐 야다바케 탑세 타르바 되냐 로쮸마 마임바케 람데 콤발라 주에데 칼테니 홍고레스나 샤니바 메바네 남버 자베 텐데 로조다 로도 콤바데니 해서 남자 속에 텐데 로조다 로도 콤바테데 시고라 다 남자 속에 텐데 로조다 로도 콤바테니 레셔라 데카레스 다 로조 세데 트라도와 다메바 콤레 라 타보 고데데 요도와 코아데 코야데 텐도 타텐데스 코체테 레베서 텐도 테 마레세 메버서 요레시고라 알레 땅마데치 랍샤네야 오레
No.
단다데치 랍샤나 군중다 군에 녀모서 텐데 로중로 도드랍샤나 마운다서야
No. So, therefore, the excellent and peerless method to generate the thought of renunciation of cyclic existence entails reflecting on the forward and reverse orders of the afflictive factors of dependent arising. So, here, when it comes to then thinking about this kind of attitude of renunciation. So we understand through the kind of forward and reverse orders of dependent origination. So here, by looking at first the kind of truth of suffering. So if we look at our suffering, really our situation of having been born and then aging and death, but also all of the other kinds of sufferings that we experience as humans and other beings. But thinking about how we crave for things that we don't get, and we have our various kinds of plans that we wanted to accomplish aren't accomplished, or meeting with the unexpected and so forth. When we look at the kind of suffering situation that we are in particular, looking at how our suffering is coming from having been born, right? We look at the kind of links of dependent origination in a reverse order. universe. So we're looking at where we are in terms of aging and death or having been born. So when we look at birth, that 11th link, we then see, well, this has to have come then from these previous links, particularly becoming, that kind of potent karma that was fostered by this kind of craving, which is in turn a stronger form of this sort of grasping. And so when it comes to looking at this kind of, particularly the truth of suffering, we are looking at the reverse order of the afflictive factors of dependent origination. So where in turn does that craving and grasping come from? Well, it comes through feeling, and our feeling in turn comes through contact. And contact occurs based upon our having the 6 sense bases and so forth. And that in turn is dependent upon name and form. And so here, in the way that we look at this reverse order of the afflictive side of dependent origination, we then are thinking about how the true sufferings, the kind of suffering that we experience, arises due to this causal process, tracing it all the way from like birth through to becoming, and then how that comes about or that is sort of made potent through the fostering done by craving and grasping, which in turn come through feeling and contact, and all the way back through to our initial ignorance, which starts that whole process. So here, thinking about that kind of reverse order is particularly contemplating the truth of suffering. And then when we look at the forward order, this is really contemplating more the truth of the origin of suffering. So we think about, well, how is it that this suffering comes about? First, we have this thought of ignorance, and then we have the kind of ignorance leads in turn to formative actions, which are placing imprints on our consciousness and so forth, and how then these 12 links proceed in that kind of forward order. So here, we'll stop before we get to then the next part of this paragraph, but contemplating the forward and reverse orders of the afflictive factors of dependent arising are really contemplating the truth of this origin of suffering in terms of the forward order, and the truth of suffering in terms of the reverse order.
Oh yeah. Oh, this. Ta namjang choje tendre lo choda lo to kombal tene lo to komde gode de ngora lo chong komde labde de ngora pena kasore chuni ba gashi chire bala soba tezo tonghe tezo kanga kare ngana gagres o kyo adan gana ene komegare dure samtang gora tonghe tezo changma yoe de kare tezo kare gane megare go chuchi ba kyo ga son ene ko ga dure sora e te tama de chuchi ba kyo ade ya tama de ya kaso chuba sibele ga son ga chuba sibele de kubalemba gana gana kubalemba de keba seba gana gana o tinde ngama de ga sona ya dona tome mare ba ga sona ninge bandu jile de yung mare se tinde se ya dora testem gode de yung do gode tunge se yo beta tise tene ta so dun go ba de yung ra gode de yung ra o tine ta lujo de se de sa ta tame de trup go ra tome mare ba de ta do jimba de ro ta do jimba de 다도 집바나 시요 말에서 라오에 다도요 말에서 다 동반이 주베르 버셔요라 제 다음에 봐도 kom 대도 공고는 것음도 또서나 에네 니번 두지게 도메 말을 봐도 매버도 그래서 다음에 것도 또는 가도 그래서 누가 초주를 다고 라 누가 초주 밑에 초대 계산 밑에 초대게 와게 그 누가 초주가라 ane ti niban duji tome maripadi ga dogo yana niba chondona niban duji le che ro sumba namshi tu chima ga do se labde kombale tene tezu kanga chondo de shegdo o tiji shena this was nyangale deba chume ge top tamba shani ba me bane number 7 tende lujo da ludo kombade ni no was o peje de kirya
So, and the superior and peerless method for generating a genuine, uncontrived intention for liberation involves contemplating the forward and reverse orders of the pure factors of dependent arising. So, here, when it comes to then the forward and reverse orders of the sort of purified side of the pure factors of dependent arising, we begin by looking at the kind of reverse order of that. So, if one wants to have a cessation of aging and death, or really a cessation of birth, how is it that we can cease birth? Well, one needs to then cease the prior link. So one would not be born if there were no becoming, the 10th link, and becoming wouldn't sort of that karma would not ripen if not for the previous links of craving and grasping. And so in this way, contemplating the reverse order of the purified factors of dependent arising, we see that if one wants, say, a cessation of aging and death, a cessation of birth, then the prior link needs to cease. And so this is then we are able to establish that by ending that kind of ignorance, that if that initial ignorance is ceased, then everything that comes after it, there is a freedom from that cycle of renewed rebirth if one is able to remove the causes that led to the ripening results. And so then looking at the forward order of the pure factors of dependent arising, this is really contemplating the truth of the path. The reverse order is looking at the truth of cessation or true cessations. And here, true paths begins by contemplating first, as opposed to initial ignorance, the first link, the kind of antidote to that is selflessness. If one realizes selflessness, that there is no such autonomous self as we grasp there to be, if one recognizes that, then that diminishes, that depletes the power to engage in formative actions. So by instead of having the first link of initial ignorance, one is to have that realization of selflessness. In turn, all of the links that would follow after that stop. The sort of, by developing that opposing factor, by developing that antidote, it stops the next link from coming about. So contemplating the forward order looks really mostly at the true paths, and the reverse orders look at true cessations.
Oh yeah, that is one. Oh, that is it. That is Samlatana Karsuda. Pena Soso Reggie Samlata. Miji Geja Tuja Reggie Lavrua. Miji Rally singing about his love give a chat. And of course, so Sula love give Sula or Kera love give the Sessona or Ngala love give said, and the Kongan Zishu Chera. Shandaji love givers or call love givers in the Kayo Marsada. Kera love givers or Ngala love givers Sessona Narzishu Chambukira. And then Namsa Ngala Lamnasa and Kongala Shinja Wagi, that land job good or something. Kirkaranga love go card as a carry jackdaw. And the coin even do the less Sagiora, Chagbe Wangi. Nanziki saw, and the Chagbe Wagi, that called carry can even do the less Sagra. This are the Konduche Karichena, Namshi the Pasha Shagra, or the Retinrisha, Mika Chulesa and Roshakdoa. To that the Shigura, the Dame Bas, something around at the mess at Tawarish Comtete. Tombani Koya water chatting. Kocherachi love Krishna, Shiratis Keva Yomar, Tawas Tongbal Ladengi Sorichambato. Namjungazu someday around at the Yomar or some lunalia. That's the Teneta was some city. Kotsu Lamna Namjuna Shingazu, Nanzishu Chimbu Yuvekom Nashiji Yomara. New Yomar, Tesamko, or T. Ducasoda. Tonda Namjungazu Tendi Alachuni, some little Tantone Awara, Pasha Shavira. Call could it in this Corgare, some reader, some lata. Ra, that call Mavison at the dress. To make the Bashi the Shagor, and the corn Juber and Bashed to make them Bakunju and Bany the Shagdoa. Corn Dover and Bashedos and Lamde and Godengi, Lamde come the corn Dodan Dolu the Shagora. Oh, the corn Juber and Bashed, Kulet and Yomonil and the corn Cordan Kulu the Shagdoa. Oh, teach Lamne, I do that.
So here, if we think about it, like say someone says some sort of bad words, something that's harsh. When we can sort of think about the links of dependent origination in terms of like if we hear someone say something like that, and then we say they say, "Oh, I'm saying that to you. I'm talking to you," and we give rise to this thought of I. Well, then all of a sudden we're mad. We're like, what? You're saying that to me? And we're all of a sudden like fighting and debating and disputing with that person. Whereas if they said something bad and then they say, oh no, I'm saying that to someone else, we don't have that same kind of reaction. We aren't going to give a response and get into this kind of creating causes from that initial thought of I. So here, this is how it kind of proceeds. If we are to, on a regular basis, contemplate the way in which we engage in these links of dependent origination, as well as how we get out of them, how we extricate ourselves from that, this is something that will be quite beneficial. So here, we need to, again, based upon the kind of engaging in them, forward and reverse. I mean, there's the forward kind of how we proceed to take rebirth due to the 12 links of dependent origination and how we avert that, how we get out of that. And it's really based upon, again, looking at this initial ignorance. We need to recognize how it is that we think I. We don't normally, most of us have this innate sense that we are something that is merely dependently designated, but rather there seems to be like this solid concrete I. And then once we have that, we are going to engage in karmas, and so it goes. But by repeatedly habituating ourselves to understanding that such an I doesn't exist, we can then cultivate the kind of antidote, selflessness, that helps lead to the end of this cycle. So here, in terms of the way in which we look at how we engage in samsara, this is really teaching the truth of suffering and the truth of the origin of suffering. And the way that we get out of that is teaching us the truth of the path and the truth of cessation, the cessation that is achieved through cultivating a particular path.
Oh yeah. Ahora teacher lamna yang tadi meta ya. Tanda wa teacher lamna yang meta. Ngajo namde na le ngo yoba. Tene tendo a mainde jula ke so se chiro siba. Tene sigara. Tendo a mai se tendo nenge che mare sigara. Koalera. Kichi kyuni chidu kyudu korate sigara. Ko tendo ta tere ba ngajo tende stu ta to tere besna. Oh, tendo a mare sigara. Takpa che tendo tende tege mare se. Tendo a mainde. Jula ke so se chiro. Ko kichi chine chidu kyuni ko se tedelo gyuyo rese. Gyude mebe sona ne kon rebu de humara. Gyu mebe ngo chi yo mara sane. Tene tendo a mainde jula ke so se chiro. Te gyude gare tome marik pa derwa. Save gyude. Tome marik pa kune lane ne le sane yungdo kanga. Kyawada me gyo le sa yungdo. Chaza nazo kichi rala ra mebe kichi chine chikdu gyude ro re tu to khorde va khoade. Tu tendo da doste rebesna odi mare ta sera. Mebe sono soya yore da se. Tene tendo a mainde se. Kare sene ko gyula tene yungro wase. Gyudilia ko nyimbo top jenge kek sigre eswara. Gyulia gyudi kare kansa tanzin dira. Save gyude gyuzode. Otela tene ne chaba je tawa ke ne shanda yongwara. Nyomo shanda. Sako nyomo dirwa le sayate nyomo wangile sagara. Nyomo zade tanzin dire dira. Sa gyula geso se chirose. Koe gyui pe tsawaate taadun zimbate res. Tele yaane nyembo topden je kek sigre sigara. Karichane sigre sana. O taadun zimbate ka tenten doa mende chula geso. Tene ten doa mende chula geso se chiro sana. Te kare sana. Chutele ya taadun zimbate ko nyembo top denge meba soto dame to weshiro de meba soto resigora karisna tadun zimba de ngoy nezu da tumba mare ngồi nè chú lệ tin chỉ ở mà đấy chỉ lo đấy rồi ta mấy bà con bé lo thế ngồi nè có ta cái nè chú ngồi nè thì sinh cái vào ra ở thế để ra có chỉ thì ngồi nè chú đã thứ bà đấy gặp đến xem mà hiểu đấy số ra ta yếu bản thân bắt đầu gặp đến xem mà hiểu mà đấy thì cái ngồi nè chú ta tận ta ngồi nè là tin đấy hiểu vậy đó thứ bà mà đó có lọc bà thứ bà cho ta đến xem vào ra ta mấy bà con bé lo thế ngồi nè ta cái nè chú ngồi nè thì ta thứ bà thì ngồi nè thì ngồi nè chú là chỉ ta nè bà nè sinh cái vào đấy xem ra rồi ở thế sống ra có cả số đó ở thế này tên đó mà để kêu là cái số sĩ rồi sĩ đó thì chỉ sẽ anh ta đó giờ bắt đầu là gặp đến xem mà mấy bé chỉ số đó có lẽ gặp đến temple lo tu đường cái xem mà họ mà đấy sẽ cái đó thế ngồi nè lúc là chính chứ lo tu xem bé lo đấy sẽ gọi đó nổi trên cái gọi đấy ta mấy bé lo thế mà nổi trên cái gọi sẽ thế là nêu cái đấy thế công ty này chỉ biết nhồi nó phải gọi đấy sẽ thì mấy bà chán hiện tại các cái đó ấy rồi, chứ đó khó là tên đó, khó có bao giờ mà đấy sẽ, tên đó mà đi chula cái số sĩ rồi, ở thế chỉ làm nên được đấy, yeah.
So here, I think it would probably be good to explain this, as it says, again, from Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika, or the Compendium on Valid Cognition. He states that, therefore, referring to here samsara and taking rebirth in samsara, this is not something that is lasting in the terms of being everlasting or permanent, because there is an antidote, or there is something that it can effectively stop the cause. So here, when we look at our situation of suffering within samsara, it is not something that is causeless, and there's nothing that is uncaused, but rather phenomena arise due to causes and conditions. So when we look at our cycling within samsara, we can identify that there is a cause. It is that initial ignorance, and it's not something that will last or remain forever, because there is an antidote that can act as an effective antidote that actually counteracts that initial ignorance. So we initially have this grasping at a self, this idea of an I, and out of that, then we give rise to attachment and aversion and all of the various afflictions. But out of our afflictions, we then accomplish all kinds of negative actions, which in turn create this cycling within samsara. But there is an antidote that is actually effective against that grasping at a self. And grasping at a self, that apprehension of a self, doesn't accord with reality. But the realization of selflessness is backed by valid cognition, is supported by valid cognition. And so the mind, as we meditate on selflessness, it will get stronger and stronger to the point where it is able to eradicate completely that grasping at a self. And this is really due to the fact that the realization of selflessness is supported by valid cognition, is backed by reality. It accords with reality. Whereas the grasping at a self is not backed by any kind of valid cognition. It is something that is false, is able to be undermined by that correct understanding. So here it is, in Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika, he explains that really this kind of situation we are in is not something which is everlasting, because there is an effective antidote to what causes it.
Oh yeah, oh that is why. That is my lotion. Oh, Nicardosana. Yan Siba College Shamdo Sido. Siba Cologo Odile, Yivichi or Dochi or Tissura. Siba Colo Shamdo, Dokariti or Sana. Somebody Jashin, you are a chase. Roa. She saw ye, Susu Cheba, Ni Decubaso, Ode, Siba Colo Shamdelia, and then Dosholoka Ni or Titi so or Sajeg. Siba Colo Shamdelia, Colo Odilia. Do sholoka nibuti so yara. Te caresen de order doa. Take over son de Siba Colo drive to the do denile donal do sera. Te long drive. Susu cheba nibu, Suja nibu the caresen de rese. Somebody chasing you are a chase. Somebody chasing yours. That's in the world you would teach and drink my tongue. Somebody chasing you are a chase. Sanje Tanlan Jubar Shas. Tatunda Koala Sobatatu Zimbal Sobat Yamupa Tozuba Paya Tundala Samgo, Bezu Chego de Sura, Bezu Chenene Koe, Kutus Pakanga, Yunku Mevas over the Sugura. Sanje Tanlan Jubar Shas, Sanje Sumbe Tambalia, Koa Pangji La Sobatin Subatin Jubar Shas. And Dambi Kimla Lanjin Chida de Chomba Dambi Kimla Damza se Chora, Langbuchetos and Damjana Shukan and it, Damgitsatos the parts to pay Chetorche Casagalpe, pay some Shagra, Dambusi, Shunal and Damzas Rumbushkeo, the Langbuchetina Shuke Sobotu Jundona, Satos Kangapa Mavis Shagra, Dambi Kimla Lanjin. Lanjing to on the Kanga Chomja, Chida de Shombar Shasa, or Chiva, Rawameba Chichig, Chida de la Sobatuba, Shombar Shasa, Rala Rawameba, Soji Pumbo Rawadon Gagwa Cheque to Zupa Mevso Shosera, Chida de Shombar Shah. Kanshi Rabdu Paye, Shindu de la Church, Kanshi Rabdu, Kyo Kanshi Paye, Petsuda de Basapso and the Paye, but Sanjay Sombe Chun Delia. Quando Chiki Kutusula, Cheva Yenasura, Chundu de la Churba, or Chundu and de la Chuba Curvas, Tanda Tungetemba Ponche Tati Tesu, Tamito Bolas over Tesusura. Koyakewa Rabane, Siba Tamati, Koyakewa de Pane, Sibane, Tarseba Chigres, and Mabas over the Segura. Oh, she's on. She told us all some shase. Tan de Singdi de Devote do Yamdo Loshanagre. Sheson don't dig a Tadun Zimbe, a Marikbe Tendegi, Kenjin, draw read to do Korkiva, Tanzi Maribe Kenji, and then Kile Kitini Sade, draw read to the Kwas, Kyolangia de Sera, and then Kyolangia de Sera. Kenji Gile, Niban Duji Gile, Legi Tendi. Joannes, that you might do somebody, Tendiala Chuni Segura, Chujiba give a tended party, Chuniba Kashi tended Jue two someday, Lujungi Kone, Toma Mebane, Tadeba do Kuleta Numombe, Wangi Rani Kor Kurzu Sambada, Ode, Samleton Sugura to somebody your chas. Young Koa Tome Marikbe. Nyemburu Marikbe Shi, Tome Marikba de Nyembudala Marikbe Shi, Tameba Musum to Toba Lamje, Temba Kumbale, Tome Marikba, Gagbatase. That Tamingus to Ton Mariba Gatika, Nibantin Gasuba, and the Mariba Gagbale, Dujin Gagbala Soba Kanga, Chimasma Gadura. A Tedarico and Gabe, Kashin Gabe, Pardo. Sambarse, Yonarcha, Sanje Talan Jumbarsara. Ludoji Kone Koan Dogbala, Sundu Zambarsashes. Ta Ludoji Kone, Luchunda Ludoji Kone, Koa Ya Tenikarsura, Dogbala Zambarsashes. Koya Pinzola, Zambarsashin, Yonarchaiba. Tatunda Luchun Ludo Samlutane, Koal and Dogbala. And the Tundru Sambachago is Tundru Shan Lujun Ludola Soba Comne, Koan Doy Tapshon Goresuda, Sambachash. You are just Koya Punzo, La Shenji Chagba, Koya Pusum Toba La Shenji Chagba, Yara Niban Duji Lesalia, Chatango Lesa Yora, Chagba de Rabdu, Yundi, Sambachash, you are just the Chagdani with the Nyamodipa, you are just Seba La Soba. Zambacha Yonarcha. Sanje Talan Jubaja, Sanje Lungi Tambet, Koa Juba, Telen Dobe, Judan Revusu, Sanje Talan Juba, Koa Judo, Yiribatan, Betendi Alachuni Tembe, Siba Colola, so to some Becadel. Sanje de Tembe, Koa Juba, Telen Dobe, Judan Revusu, Tembashi, Landola Juba Chaose, Koa Jube. Rebatan Doga Riba, Seni Gudwa, Kuna nyomo be tende luto samne tunge temba kunju temba ni yongwe ba. Nambar changwe tende luto samne go tenda lamde ni de yongwe ba tal shetsara o de sungora. Kyudan debu chu temba shi lando lan jubar sambar sha shi yongwa sanje talan jubar cha se de do. Dabi kimla lanje shi se pechan so do da. Teya pena lanje gen dabi kim shobar cheba Shindu, Chua Tondo Nyawa Namja, Chida Jite, Seba, so Nyomomba Nam Shombar Chashes, Chida Dene Shombar Chas, Nyomombe Tudere, Chida, so Rameba, Shichungege, Chida Gitu, Seba del Sedua, Seba, Chabadal, Nyomomba Nam Shombar Chashes, Kyo Kanshiki Rabdu. Bayo Barchade, Chida de Shore, Somebody Sandan, Damja, Chida de Shore. Kashi Rabdo Bayo Bessedra, Kyo Kashi, Rabdo, Shupchambo, Bayo, Sunday, Subsourcing Sera. Bayo Barchade, Kuna Yomuba, Duji, Tameba, Musumdo Togbe, and the Casa, Lamla Soba, Pabbe, Lamia, Keji, Chun Duandela. Chever Joanani. Somebody was Sanjay and Damjan. Kashi Rabdo Pai, Chundu de la Church was the Palamia Jela, so what Chundu de la Segua, Chundu de la Churchuba. Kia Koa Rabana Tumeta Machevan Jose. Oh, Dudo. Yala Jeji Chundu de la Chever and Jura Namne, Koya Jawa Rabdo Pane, Jaga Nachila Soba, Tunge. Chever Cheban Juros, oh, that is Badolosana. Then the Tal Shets Hungary to Makali Lol Session to do. Yeah.
So, picking up in the text, again, with regard to the drawing of the wheel of life, it is said that the Buddha gave instructions to write below the wheel of life 2 verses, as explained in his exegesis of the discipline. So here, these were verses that the Buddha said should be written below the wheel of life. And these 2 verses then read, undertaking this and leaving that, enter into the teaching of the Buddha, like an elephant in a thatched house, destroy the forces of the Lord of Death. Those who with thorough conscientiousness practice this disciplined doctrine will forsake the wheel of birth, bringing sufferings to an end. So here, then the kind of commentary to this comes in following. So here, this example of an elephant is used. Like an elephant, I don't know what exactly it would be called, like reeds or something. And when an elephant goes down and stomps all over that, in the same way that like if you had a house that was made out of like reeds or some sort of thatching, an elephant could make pretty quick work of that. And so here, someone who is contemplating enters into the teaching of the Buddha, undertakes this and leaves that. And we'll get into in the passage that comes below exactly what that's referring to. So this scripture also explains how to contemplate conditioning factors, the second factor of dependent arising, which projects rebirth in cyclic existences as the 5 or 6 types of beings due to the initial ignorance apprehending as self. So again, thinking about the reverse order and the forward order in terms of initial ignorance then creates conditioning factors, which is that which acts as a cause, a sort of projecting cause for a rebirth in samsara. So this contemplation then continues up to how aging and death arises depending on the 11th factor of dependent arising birth. So the scripture explains this contemplation of how you pass through cyclic existence from beginningless time up to now under the power of causal karma and afflictions in terms of this forward order. So again, thinking about that forward order in which it is the case that due to this initial ignorance, we create karmic actions, and in turn, the kind of craving and grasping leads to nurturing those karmas into further existence, or sorry, becoming, and then birth and aging and death and so forth. So furthermore, and explains how to contemplate the way to end initial ignorance by meditating on its countermeasure, the truth of the path that directly knows the non-existence of the self that is the referent object of ignorance. So due to this cessation of ignorance, the second factor, conditioning factors, ceases. This process of cessation continues until due to the cessation of birth, aging, and death cease. So this then gets into the description of the verse. You should undertake, the first part of that verse, joyous perseverance with respect to the cessation of cyclic existence by means of the reverse order. So undertaking the kind of various paths that will act as a countermeasure to that initial ignorance. And you will certainly emerge from cyclic existence, leaving behind attachment to and clinging to the marvels of cyclic existence. So in this way, you enter the purpose of the verbal teaching of the Buddha, the adopting and discarding described within the Four Noble Truths, the way of cause and effect for entering cyclic existence and reversing that process. So again, the kind of stages of engaging in samsara and extricating oneself from that are the way in which one sort of engages in the teachings. You adopt what is to be taken up into practice and what is to be discarded from the Four Noble Truths based upon that. And thereby, then the example is given. Moreover, just like an elephant destroying a thatched house, those who are intent on liberation destroy the afflictions of craving and so forth, the forces of the Lord of Death. So here we often hear this referred to as the Mara of death, that taking death uncontrollably due to the factors of karma and the afflictions. And so one is able to overcome that by having destroyed the kinds of causes that lead to renewed rebirth. So after becoming thoroughly conscientious in the sense of being careful with respect to what one takes up and what one avoids, they will practice this disciplined doctrine of the Eightfold Path that disciplines the afflictions, the wisdom that directly knows selflessness and so forth. They will then eliminate birth in cyclic existence and sever the continuity of the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death, and so forth. So those who, based upon this understanding, are disciplined or conscientious, then will engage in such a way as they are able to, like an elephant destroying a thatched house, destroy the forces of the Lord of Death.
Oh yeah, this one.
This one.
Oh yeah, that's the matter. Tamba sanje je shilam drebe che chini je songba nam ne se do sanje chumden de shi temba ni lam tapshi ni drebu ku ni stre chane de shi temba shi se lam stre chane de shi temba ni se kunzu temba da tambe temba se gora tambe temba tongba ni de she de ko nyomo la soba kanga paye tapshi de she do kunzu temba de she de tenje de bar jowa ya chachi ronwa tabgi chadu kanga yongora tenje de bar jowa la chachi merona ni chamba ningji chanju go samla soba chimba tsuten soba la soba tezo tene mego ge su de chadu yora o ti de ko tabdo shirab ni de nigal ji yogo yorto shileya shi namsha de la karsoda temba ni shi temba ni se tambe temba tongba ni ra tambe tongba ni ina ya chawa kanya merong ya tongba mai ba tenje de bar jowa rawa du de chawa chenge chimena mangbo ji so ne tenje de bar jowe chawa chenge yore su kunzu temba de she yora tele ya ane ko konge yore tonghe nyonge yore te sonza tezole mene nyingji ki chamba ki rawa chanju usem ki chimba tawne pendo yoba soba komkwe wala soba tezu kange yong yora tabji chade ya tongbanji de mena tambe namshati gu mare ne tongele sawa tonghe ki sawa chuji tab me chara kunzu tenje debar jo kunzu de mena tabji chade me chara sa shi temba ni se lam tabshi ni se ra shi temba ni namsha de manowa ji yona ene lam tab de shirab ni de manowa ji gora debu ku ni se tar debu toya de ku ni se sonam je so sabala tene kunzubla tembe sonam je so sabala tene suku rawa ane tamba tongba ni togbe 대조 교체는 추구세 추수지 꾸니시거라 추구들의 시 추구 뭐니고시 방자 방배 좋아 저번에가 방바들에 용 방바대에 용 거래 최담정 웃음도 김바대 용으로 전에 수고들에 농구도 주고시 대바신 붙이나 어디 용 거라 어디 지람나 가서 점바 산계지 실험 대비 최진이지 송바 남 땡진 대바를 좋아 니래 니라 자외 신전에 송바시 땡진 대바를 좋아 최송에 대고라 다가서 좀 기순도 시샤 말아 뭐네 중이나 매나 된데게 말해 땡진 대바를 좋아 뭐고 고라게 좋아 수자 대로를 자취라 소바 뭐고 고라게 내당을 때네 아니 템바지 송고래 소라 최진이 송바 남네 땡진 대바를 좋아 니라 자외 신전에서 땡진 대바를 좋아 최고라죠 내당들이야 아니 터두게 내당 동반이다 얘네 동반 라완도 주베 동반 얘네야 근데 초점을 때는 샤와치 통계지 땡진 대바를 좋아지 샤 토구도와 대인데 대졸의 신전에 송고래서 시 남샤소도 텔레 때는 탑 람시니다 근데서 탑대 시럽 때주된 되게다 템바 산계지 실험 대비 최진이지 송바 남네 땡진 대바를 좋아 니라 자외 신전에 송신에서 타르 법사야 땡진 대바를 좋아 좋아 내남 인시 땡진 대바를 좋아 최남 랑신기 주베 동신도 땡데라 내가래 땡데라 자세 내버려 어래 땡데라 자세 탐제 로한데 신도 또 가와 고네 다자게 때 강이 도시된 동거버서 사견에 샤트 다트인지 봐도 주제기 쉬마서 버쇼서세 제 동반이게 쳐데 사부인 발라 konde sanje sanke san namsa tijita bi cheshi koyni sulatan ya konmen memanang dam ni do never shas masum je shwe de to ka wo sonza ane tende sombare sro de boto chichona.
So here, the Buddha, so in every single statement of the Buddha's teachings concerning the basis, path, and goal, he makes dependent arising the fundamental basis. So here, when we talk about the basis, the path, and the goal, or the basis, path, and result, we have first the two truths, conventional and ultimate truth, that are the basis. And then there is the path in terms of the two, method and wisdom. And then there is the goal or the result of the two bodies, a form and truth body. And so here, when it comes to the basis, these two truths, ultimate truth is the method by which we are able to eliminate that grasping at some kind of true existence. So emptiness is actually what it enables the kind of freedom from the suffering situation that we are in. But this emptiness isn't some sort of nihilistic kind of emptiness where nothing else is able to function or exist, but rather it is compatible with the truth of conventional existence, that all actions and agents are viable within this, that even though they are merely dependently designated, we can still talk about actions bringing about results and so forth. And so although the Buddha has spoken about emptiness and the lack of inherent existence, he still talks about there being beings who are within samsara, those who cycle within this cyclic existence. And so here then, when it comes to the basis, then there is the truth of, there's conventional truth describing the kind of ways of understanding causality, and ultimate truth, their lack of any kind of inherent existence. Now, when it comes to then the path, there is the method side, which really comes from the kind of conventional truth, and the wisdom side. So without having this wisdom, there would be no way to develop the kind of understanding that cuts that root of cyclic existence. But if there were no method side, then one wouldn't be able to engage in the various activities that act as causes to achieve this particular goal. So the result then comes in terms of the form body and the truth body, the form body being the result of the accumulation of merit, and the truth body being the result of the accumulation of wisdom. And we can talk about within the truth body, there being that that is the sort of cessation, the true cessations in terms of the abandonment, the freedom that comes from the abandonment of the various afflictions and then cognitive obscurations, as well as the wisdom that realizes all phenomena. So that kind of positive, the realization side, as well as the abandonment side. And so here, when it comes to the Buddha's teachings regarding the basis, the path, and the result, this is not as though he is making up some sort of story about dependent origination, but rather these are all based in dependent origination as being the reality, the way that things exist. It's not some sort of story that is being made up, but rather this is a description of the reality of the way that things are. So, as it says here, when arriving at the final conclusion, his essential points are about dependent arising. While dependently arisen phenomena are empty of inherent establishment, all activities and functions are feasible as dependent arisings. So realizing that this is very difficult to understand, our teacher, after reaching completely perfect Buddhahood and Bodhgaya, stayed without giving the teaching about freedom from elaboration for 7 weeks. So again, the Buddha realized this very profound truth. Again, these two are compatible in that we have emptiness of inherent existence, but that actually reinforces dependent origination. It's not as though there's an autonomous emptiness out over there, or that method and wisdom are totally separate. But the kind of truth of this, as there is a verse that summarizes, is something extremely profound, such that after having realized this, the Buddha did not initially teach for 7 weeks, thinking that no one would be able to understand this profound reality or this profound truth which he had realized.
Oh yeah, that is. Oh,
So, we are out of time then for today, so we will stop here for today.
Thank you so much for your teachings today, Geshela. And Katrina, thank you for your translations. Again, a reminder that we only have 1 or 2 classes left in this series. And so if you'd like to make an offering to Geshela or Katrina or to the Abbey for hosting, the information is in the chat box. And we'll hope to see you next Monday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific time. We'll finish with some dedication prayers.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of wholesome's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Oh yeah.
就这能给呢，就就这嘛这样了。